Hello, everybody. My name is Xiaohan Bao Smith. I'm the Historic Properties Coordinator of Michigan Historic Preservation Network. And welcome to our August webinar. Our topic today is Project We Hope, Dream, and Believe, the Malcolm X House. We are very excited today to have three speakers that they will provide a lot of interesting, exciting information about this project. And before I turn it over to the speaker, I would like to go over some Zoom items. If you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box as you think of them. Make sure it's a Q&A box, not the chat box, so we can all see it. And all the questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. And feel free to use the chat box to share your thoughts and resources. Both the chat box and Q&A box are located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you don't see them, please wiggle your mouse. And please help us improve our webinar by participating in the survey after the webinar concludes. If this is your first time attending our webinar, we are the Michigan Historic Preservation Network. We are a statewide nonprofit organization that advocates for Michigan's historic places to contribute to our economic vitality, sense of place, and connection to the past. We could not do the work we do without our members and volunteers. So if you're not a member yet, please consider joining us at www.mhpn.org. This webinar is supported in part by an award from the Michigan Arts and Culture Council. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to our speaker, and they will do a self-introduction. And please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Johan. I appreciate it. Thank you to the MHPN for affording us the opportunity to talk about our project. We're super excited. And also thank you to my fellow panelists and colleagues who are here today as well. My name is Tariq Ramadan. I'm an adjunct interdisciplinary professor at Wayne State University, where I've been teaching anthropology and Near Eastern Studies courses for the past 15 years. I'm also an immigration, educational, and cultural competency consultant and the project manager for Project We Hope, Dream, and Believe, an Inkster-based nonprofit organization involved in the Malcolm X Project. And I am sharing the stage today with Mr. Aaron Sims, who is the founder and executive director of the Inkster-based nonprofit organization, Project We Hope, Dream, and Believe. And he is also the former head of the Wayne County chapter of the NAACP. And also with us is Mr. Robert Turley. Robert Turley is the author of a forthcoming memoir known as Inktown. Robert's family has lived in Inkster for over 50 years, and he conducts historical tours of the city as well. He is a musician who's received international critical acclaim and has been featured in a variety of publications and television shows. He's also the founder and president of the 3,000-member Korean Art Society and recipient of the Global Korea Award from the Council on Korean Studies at Michigan State University. He has written textbook chapters on art and history from McGraw-Hill as well. And so today we are going to present a kind of multifaceted presentation about the work that we've been doing at the Malcolm X House in Inkster, alongside some broader contextual details about Inkster history, alongside a sort of narrative regarding the kind of backdrop to acquiring the house and all of the other work that we've been doing thus far and that we hope to do in the future. So what I'd like to do is, if you can all see the PowerPoint presentation, is ultimately hand this off to Mr. Aaron Sims, who is going to talk about the efforts that him and his close friend, Mr. Dewan Lin, who was also an Inkster native, poet, musician, and executive board member at Project We Hope, Dream, and Believe, and their sort of story behind acquiring the house. Now, from that point, we'll move on to Mr. Robert Turley, who's going to provide us with some background information about the history of Inkster, alongside some of the work that he's been doing related to the Malcolm X Project. And I'll continue with the rest of the presentation, discussing some additional details as well as some of the ongoing efforts and some of the future plans. So with that being said, I will hand this off to Mr. Aaron Sims so that he can talk to you about the way in which he and Mr. Lin acquired the home.
Good evening, everybody, or good afternoon, should I say. My name is Aaron Sims, and I'm the founder of Project We Hope, Dream, and Believe. And as Dr. Tork was talking, I believe it was back in 2006 when we started working on, when I started working on Project We Hope, Dream, and Believe. In 2007, me and Dewan was in the city of Inkster, and we were cutting grass in the city of Inkster. And we had asked each other a question if Malcolm X really lived in Inkster. So we tried to Google it to find out if it was true, and we couldn't find nothing on Google to say that Malcolm lived in the city of Inkster. So at that time, we sat there and we wind up Googling the FBI file. And when we Googled Malcolm X's FBI file, and that's where we found that he lived in Inkster at 4336 Williams Street. So from that point, we drove around and we went to Williams Street, and the house still stood there. As me and Dewan sat there and we talked, we was just amazed at how a person such as Malcolm X spent most of his life in the state of Michigan alone. But then after years, he wandered right back to the city. He wandered to the city of Inkster. So from that point, we challenged the city of Inkster, who had the house on the demolition list to be torn down. We conspired with individuals through the community to help raise the voice to try to save the house, and we wound up saving the house. So in 2012, Project We Hope, Dream, and Believe had submitted the paperwork to the IRS, and in 2014, the IRS had wind up certifying Project We Hope, Dream, and Believe as a nonprofit organization. Our organization is basically a youth mentoring program where we try to do our part in giving the youth the tools that they need to be part of a global society, just all around the world, and to help push them to find out what their goal is. But when we had the chance to excuse me, to take on the project of the Malcolm X home, we just went on ahead and went for it, and just got everything moving. And we was awarded the house in 2016, I want to say, either 2016 or 2017. And from that point, we just started putting our feet to the ground and started working. And we wind up writing a grant to the historical preservation. And when we did that, they gave us a grant for $380,000 and $850. And then the Ford Foundation turned around and gave us a $50,000 grant to help with the house as well. So from this point, I just think it's amazing of the work that we're doing right now with preserving the history, not only of Malcolm X, but the history that's rooted in the state of Michigan alone. This is a big effort because now we're seeing that taking our history through the state of Michigan very serious now. That Michigan is a jewel that has so much to offer. And Project We Hope, Dream, and Believe is just proud to be on board and share with everybody the work that we're doing.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sims. We appreciate the background. The story in and of itself is so incredibly important and so valuable. and hope that it serves as a model for other people who are looking to preserve important historical sites in Michigan. And so I know that the city of Inkster and its residents are super excited about this project. When we did excavations there a few weeks ago, there was an incredible outpour from the community. And so it really highlighted the fact that the Malcolm X house really is resonating with Inkster residents and also non-Inkster residents too. But there's been incredible support on that side of things. So thank you. So Malcolm arrives to Inkster this month in 1952. So this month serves as the sort of 50th anniversary of Malcolm's arrival. And Malcolm comes to the home after being paroled by the Massachusetts State Prison and Parole Board, who releases Malcolm into essentially the custody of his brother, Wilford Little, who lives in Inkster at 4336 William Street. There's a photo of him in this slide right here on the bottom. And that's Wilford on the left side, I believe, and his other brother, Philbert. So he arrives here in Inkster in 1952 on August 8th. After he's paroled August 7th, he takes a bus and arrives here, that day on August 8th. And he lives with Wilford, his elder brother, who also was really important in Malcolm's sort of development while he was in prison, but also before that, and also was a major figure in Malcolm's subscription to the Nation of Islam, which was the religious organization that Malcolm was best known for. Can you guys see my slides, or is there an issue? No? Okay. Let me readjust that. How about now? Good to go? Okay, sorry about that. So my slides are back. So here are just some photos from the 1950s showing a bus arriving in Detroit, a photo of Malcolm and his two brothers, including Wilford and Philbert, and also the original address sign 4336 for William Street. At the time that Malcolm arrived, in Inkster, it was the area that he lived in was in fact a working class, largely African-American neighborhood, but the demographics were actually kind of were actually quite mixed, and I'll even have Mr. Turley talk about that over the next few slides. But Wilford was a major figure in Malcolm's life, pretty much throughout his life, but was really important in helping to establish and settle Malcolm after he was released from prison after serving 6.5 years in Massachusetts. So Malcolm also describes his life with Wilford in his autobiography, which I'll also let Robert mention in the next few slides here. So I'm going to go over to the next set of slides, and so the slides are not displayed. Is this still happening? Is this still an issue with the slides? Oh, you guys can see them? Okay. Can anyone else see the slide still, or?
No, we're still stuck on the first slide with the bus.
Okay, so are we good now? The next slide?
Yep.
Okay, all right, perfect then. And so again, Mr. Robert Turley, who's an Inkster native, internationally critically acclaimed musician, historian, writer. I'll actually let him provide you with some other details about his autobiography. And he's going to discuss Inkster's history, providing some contextual kind of backdrop to trying to place Malcolm in the 1950s. So I'll hand it over to you, Mr. Turley.
Thank you very much, Professor Ramadan. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for MPNH for hosting this, and I appreciate this opportunity. Well, Inkster's history is long and it's broad. It includes a living NASA director, president of the National Baseball League Hall of Fame, an inventor for whom University of Michigan has an annual award named after. Actually, a self-taught surgeon. That's the James Crudup Award for Excellence in Surgical Research. It's an annual award at U of M. And it includes a long list of musicians, including the Marvelettes, who wrote and recorded Motown's first #1 record, an Olympic medalist, a Rose Bowl MVP, congressional gold medalist, and that list just really can go on and on and on. But as the history relates to Malcolm X and our subject today, the Inkster first began being occupied by people who were not Native American in 1825. We have our first both European American and African American residents. It wasn't called Inkster yet. It was all Nankin Township, but it is one of the first integrated communities in America. There's always been an African American and European American population, both a Black and white population in Inkster, and the African American population has grown, and I believe the white population now is about 17%, according to the 2020 census. And there was an Underground Railroad station in Inkster at the corner of Michigan Avenue and Henry Ruff. Not only an Underground Railroad station, but a last stop on the Underground Railroad, because the next stop from Inkster would have been Canada. And there are descendants of some of those people involved in the Underground Railroad still living in Inkster. For example, George de Baptiste, an African-American gentleman who owned the T. Whitney steamboat. He made regular deliveries of lumber to Amherstburg, Canada. And on the way there, he colluded with Henry Ruff's father, James Ruff, and his grandfather, Francis Ruff. I mentioned Henry Ruff because that's our border street, our western border street in Inkster. And they owned Ruff's Hotel there at Henry Ruff and Michigan Avenue. And it was, as I said, the last stop on the Underground Railroad station. So there's a long history of representation and fighting, representation in the fight for civil rights in Inkster. Our founder, Robert Inkster, was also an abolitionist. He would hide anti-slavery pamphlets he would sneak them into the Detroit Free Press, which was delivered through the post office at that time, and he was the postmaster. He did it illegally and at great risk. And all these abolitionists worked at great risk because the fine back then for being involved in abolitionist activities was $1,000 at a time when a house cost $300. Reverend Marcus Swift, one of the men active in the Underground Railroad, had his house burned down, his mill burned down. So these were brave people who founded and created the spirit of Inkster, and that spirit, we believe that Malcolm X is part of that spirit as well, and part of that lineage. As Dr. Ramadan mentioned, Malcolm came to Inkster in 1952 when he was first paroled from prison. Lived with his brother, Wilfred Little, at 4336 William Street. And I want to say there is a lot of oral history in Inkster. Inkster is rich with oral history, and much of it has been passed on through the decades and even centuries. There's a lot of longevity in Inkster. We had, in fact, the longest living person in the world was the oldest living person in the world was Geraldine Talley until she passed away in 2015 at the age of 116. So there's a lot of longevity of both the people and of the legacy and of the stories that are passed on. And I had the good fortune of being best friends with Malcolm X's, the Little family's next door neighbor, the Milan family. This, of course, was after Malcolm had left. But Malcolm was still visiting the home regularly right through the end of his life, through the 1960s as well, and met with prominent civil rights leaders there in the home. But I was lucky to be regaled with stories of Malcolm X by Darrell Milan's parents, who lived next door to Malcolm X when Malcolm lived there. My social studies teacher, Ms. Powell, and a number of other local historians, including Malcolm X's postal carrier, Norris Story, an appropriate last name, I think, and his nickname was Nip Story. we called him. And he had a lot of, he was friends with Malcolm and had a lot of stories as well. And also the Miles family that started the Black and White Cab Company in 1946. They still reside in Inkster and still operate that company after nearly 70 years. And Malcolm drove a cab for the company. And they have many stories about Malcolm as well. And these stories have been corroborated. I believe when 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different sources tell you the same story, sources who don't know each other tell you the same story about Malcolm X, then you have to give credibility to that story. And so I've been collecting these stories over the decades. Ever since I was a kid, I've been fascinated with history and with Malcolm X. And so now I conduct 2 different tours in Inkster, the Inktown tour, which is a general history of Inkster, and the Malcolm X and Inkster tour, where we visit sites that are important to the transition of Malcolm Little to Malcolm X, because Inkster, it was not only the home of Malcolm X, but it is the place where he made the transition from a life of crime to a life of service, and from Malcolm Little to Malcolm X. If there's anything else you want me to speak on, Professor Ramadan, I'd be happy to, but I think I've covered a lot of what has to do with a lot of our history that I think is relevant to this subject today. I'm sorry, your mic is muted.
Oh, so thank you so much, Mr. Turley. I appreciate the excellent insights into providing some history about the city of Inkster, and also for raising the issues of oral history and how pertinent that has really been. And we're obviously everyone's thankful for you having collected so much information about the stories that were circulating in Inkster regarding Malcolm X, because he didn't live there for very long. But the fact of the matter is that everyone seems to have some recollection of Malcolm having lived in the area. And you're absolutely right. The neighbors that you spoke to, we were fortunate to have spoken to a couple of them during our excavations, and they all corroborated the same exact things that you have told us, over the past year regarding Malcolm and his life and activities in the area. So that's we're going to address that a little bit later as well, and I'll have you provide us with a few more those stories if you have some too. So thank you for providing us with some of the important sort of demographic information, as well as the historical backdrop to again situating Malcolm in history, as well as the city of Inkster. For those who don't know, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the Inkster project with Henry Ford or not. If not, I can kind of go over these slides quickly, but if you'd like to, you certainly can.
Well, sure. That's an important part of Inkster's history. Inkster has been subjected to a really harsh form of segregation. Segregation has been around, of course, for a very long time, but I think Inkster has been subjected to it on a level perhaps unseen elsewhere. Though, of course, I don't want to discount the great suffering that other communities have gone through as well. But Inkster, Henry Ford had, as you mentioned, an Inkster project, sort of a sociological experiment that he and his company were conducting. And that included separating African-American workers from separating their homes from the homes of their white workers. The largest factory in the world when it was built in the 1920s was the River Rouge plant in Dearborn. It at one time employed over 100,000 workers. And the workers from Inkster, no doubt, worked just as hard as the workers from Dearborn, but they reaped far fewer benefits because they were separated from Dearborn. They were not allowed to live in Dearborn. It's only recently that any African Americans have been allowed to live in Dearborn. Dearborn had a form of apartheid, a really, really harsh, really strict segregation going on for a very long time. And so as a result, the African-American workers at the Dearborn factories could only live in Inkster. There were very few communities where African-Americans could live at that time. Besides Inkster, there was Black Bottom and Paradise Valley in Detroit. But since the Inkster residents were separated from the very high property taxes that were paid by the factories, we had much smaller coffers than the city of Dearborn. And Inkster residents, as I said, worked just as hard as the Dearborn residents and paid about the same in property taxes. But our schools and all our facilities had much less funding than the Dearborn residents had. In addition to that, I mean, that may not be so very sad, but unfortunately, it's not so unusual. But what's really striking is some of the other forms of segregation that Inkster was subjected to. For example, and perhaps most galling is the city of Dearborn Heights actually took from Inkster in 1960 and was litigated through 1963, and Dearborn Heights prevailed significantly. That was 1 year before the 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed. But Dearborn Heights not only took a large strip of land from Inkster, our entire eastern corridor, which ran between Gully and Beach Daly roads, and from our southern border, Annapolis, to our northern border, Cherry Hill, 2.5 miles long. Not only a large segment of our land, but also our most valuable land, because it was our industrial sector. And there was the Pepsi plant was there. There was the America's first manufacturer of armored cars was there, a number of other factories. And homes rated R1A, the highest level of property tax, are in that zone. And that's where the Home Depot is, some of you may be familiar with, on Michigan Avenue between Gully and Beach Daly. Ironically, that Home Depot, our looted land, put out of business the Allen Lumber that I worked at as a teenager. But the Michigan State Supreme Court ruled against Inkster and found there was no racial bias, and you can read their opinions where they make statements that I'm sure sounded ridiculous then, and they sound even more ridiculous now. I mean, the judges were saying things like an African-American person could live in Dearborn anytime they wanted, and that just wasn't the case then, and it's barely the case now. As recently as the mid-'80s, Dearborn had passed laws against non-residents being in their parks, and the police would kick only African Americans out of the park. They didn't ask anybody else for their ID. So this sort of thing was happening even in the 1980s. And so the Michigan State Supreme Court also ruled, though, by a 4-3 decision, to leave the case open. So with no time limit. And I have spoken to a partner in that original law firm that represented Inkster in the 1960s. And I've spoken to the children of the lawyer who represented Inkster. His name was Theodore Sachs. His son is Jeffrey Sachs, the author of The End of Poverty. He's a frequent guest on CNN and other news stations. And they all agree that a case could be brought. And there is much recent precedent for it. There was that beachfront property in California recently, Bruce Beach, I think it's called, that was returned to a family that had stolen from them 100 years ago, an African-American family. And the Governor Newsom and other politicians in California said, well, this is proof that this sort of thing can be done. And I believe it can be done in Inkster as well. So yeah, that's sort of my expanded answer to the question about Ford's Inkster project.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Robert. I appreciate that. And so you did mention that there was to some extent there was a demographic sort of shift. I mean, by the early to mid 20th century, Inkster was still primarily a Euro-American or white village and or white city. By 1970, Inkster was about 45% African American. By 2019, that number had transitioned to about 73% African American. And by as you said before, you know, Inkster has this rich history of integration that goes back from the early, at least the first quarter, the first part of the 19th century as well. And so I think that recognition, at least I think that historical sort of aspect of social life in Inkster has been recognized by many Inkster residents as well. Not to say that there doesn't continue to be you know, issues which are maybe the residual effects of longstanding policies that continue to affect, you know, Inkster, which are predicated upon, you know, racial biases or discriminatory policies that have been enacted in the past. Now, Malcolm arrives in Inkster really right at the kind of right at the sort of the right before the beginning of the civil rights movement which starts really in 1954. He gets there in 1952. But really, so he arrives at a time in which there's already, extensive, at least brewing sentiments that revolving around challenging the status quo as it relates to the issue of race. Now, segueing into the home itself, this is a more recent photo of the house that Malcolm would have lived in. It's really kind of the home of Wilfred Little. It's kind of an unassuming bungalow, and most of, actually really all of the homes on the street look pretty much the same as this. And it was built roughly around 1950. At least that's what the realtor records have shown us. It's a house that is quite small. There's 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, a kind of utility room, a bathroom, and there's also the upstairs attic as well. It's kind of the modern minimalist design, mid-century. Its current state is it's structurally sound, but in poor condition. And Aaron, if you'd like to kind of discuss the house a little bit, that'd be great. If you want to talk a little bit about the condition of the house currently, and maybe what the house endured relatively recently.
So right now, as we sit and we wait for the historical preservation to approve the architect work, the grant does allow us to work around the house. So as of now, we're in the process of cutting all the trees down, the overgrown rubbish, and making the yard more presentable for the community and in the area. So what we did find out when we started cleaning the house out was that a person did squat in the home before we were awarded the house, and the roof wind up catching on fire. But it didn't. It was just like scalded like the inside of the house, but not not on the outside. So the whole house has been gutted out and is ready for work to be done on the inside once we get approved by architectural drawings. As Dr. Tork said, the home is solid, but we do have bits and pieces around the house from like before the house was purchased, like a little bit of vandalism with areas that was kicked out, like pieces of wood that was kicked out, like on the back of the house, but it's been boarded up. So once we get the approval to start the construction work, we should be in full phase between 6 to 8 months of getting the house finished.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. And as you can see from the map here, the house is located just northwest of the Annapolis and Inkster intersection. And if you're not familiar with Inkster, Inkster is located about 15 or 16 miles or so, I believe, roughly from downtown Detroit. It's surrounded by cities like Dearborn Heights, Garden City, Wayne. I think Westland is also in the vicinity as well. Population today is about 26,000 in Inkster. And I think Aaron may have mentioned this earlier, but part of the way in which Mr. Sims was able to locate the house was through an examination of the FBI records. The FBI began surveilling Malcolm really in the late 1940s, early 1950s, due to some of his political positions that he articulated through some letters to President Truman and other politicians as well. So there is a pretty vast set of historical records that are derived from the FBI file, which monitor and surveil Malcolm's life, where he worked, his health, where he lived, who he kind of interacted with, where he traveled. All that stuff is pretty much was recorded and documented by local law enforcement, including the DPD, the Detroit Police Department, Wayne County Sheriff's Department, as well as the FBI, who circulated all kinds of memos and memorandums and notes between the different field offices in their attempt to surveil and monitor Malcolm's activities. And of course, that escalated more and more after he joined the Nation of Islam, which was viewed by many as a Black nationalist movement that was challenging, the racial status quo, but also U.S. law enforcement as well. And so he was under surveillance, and we have some documents here, like for example, in this slide right here, which clearly shows where Malcolm's residence was. It has him listed as Malcolm K. Little. It's a security matter, and it's got the address of 4336 William Street, Inkster, Michigan, at the home of his brother, Wilford. And you can see there are all kinds of markings. This one dates from February 17th of 1953. It's one of the earlier documents regarding Malcolm. I think it's page 3 in his FBI file from that year. So he was surveilled and he was documented. So we're able to kind of excavate some of Malcolm's life from these records. It indicates that Malcolm, worked locally. Mr. Turley had mentioned the local black and white taxi cab company. In one of his tours, Mr. Turley also highlighted the fact that a local resident who wrote a book about her time with the Nation of Islam, who lived in Inkster, just a few streets over from Malcolm, had also described how Malcolm worked for her father at a local construction company for a little bit, very briefly, and then also worked for a home products line as well as a local salesperson. And then he worked for Garwood Industries. He worked for the Ford Motor Company, for the Lincoln Mercury stamping plant out in Wayne. He also initially worked with his brother at Sam's Cut Rate department store selling furniture. So Malcolm was certainly, and of course, from the oral history that's been collected, we know that Malcolm was a very sociable person who connected with all kinds of people and regularly visited his neighbors and spoke to them as well. So between the FBI records, the law enforcement documents that we have, alongside the oral history that Mr. Turley and other residents have circulated, we are really trying to kind of reconstruct Malcolm's life alongside the social life of the house itself, and trying to provide the most comprehensive sort of and holistic picture of Malcolm's life while in Inkster. As Mr. Sims had noted earlier, the home the home of Malcolm X was also neighbors to 2 other homes which have since been razed and demolished, leaving the lots to the south of the home empty. There was no structure to the north of the house, to its immediate north, but there was one in the next lot, which is, I believe, the family that Mr. Turley had known for many years and had spoken to members and recording some of Malcolm's history in the neighborhood. Here are just some photos of the house to get you kind of better situated. All of this is going to be renovated, rehabilitated, and ultimately transformed into a museum. Mr. Sims has been successful in finding residents who have been kind enough to donate some of their period furniture and appliances, so the house on the inside will look like it did in the 1950s. This is standing at the south end of the house, looking towards the north. Here are some sketches of the home. This provides you some insight into the layout of the structure itself. Oops. Here are some images of inside the home. Again, it's still structurally sound, but clearly it's in need of renovations. And so we've been very fortunate to receive a grant through the Historical Preservation Fund. It's an African American Civil Rights grant, and it's administered by the National Park Service. And so that grant for $380,850 is going to be used to completely rehabilitate the home, renovate it, preserve it, transform it into a museum, which is going to highlight Malcolm's life as a civil rights leader, but also his life as was lived in what was then the village of Inkster. The bathtub is believed to be original, and it's quite it's interesting because as Mr. Turley has noted in the past, chapter 12 of the Malcolm X autobiography discusses and describes his life with his family, Wilford, Ruth, and their kids, in practicing Islam and preparing the pre-ritual wash for prayer, the pre-prayer ritual wash. And this happened in this bathroom. It likely would have happened in the sink and maybe even in this bathtub. So that's one of the few things, appliances, for example, that still have remained intact inside the home. Here is a photo of Malcolm standing up. It looks like a pretty young Malcolm because of the very short hair, praying the Islamic prayer in a room that looks very closely, I mean, looks very similar to the upstairs attic room. We haven't been able to verify this photo as to where it was taken and when, but it's very possible that this could be the same room. We don't know for sure. I think Robert, Aaron, and I have been trying to investigate this for some time now. Now, the home has been listed, fortunately, with the National Registry of Historic Places in November of last year under the criteria of social history and ethnic heritage. And the period of significance is 1952 to 1953. That is the time in which Malcolm was a resident of 4336 William Street. And so we are fortunate to have gotten the grant, also have gotten the house listed on the National Registry of Historic Places, also through the hard work and support of the State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO, out in Lansing. They've been really instrumental in getting this house listed, which has been obviously a really, I mean, a jewel for Inkster residents and fans of Malcolm as well, all of who are very much elated over the fact that, you know, Project We Hope Dream Believe was able to do this. So we're very thankful and very grateful, and obviously incredibly happy. We were also able to just last month. In fact, we started a month ago to the date on July 18th of last month in excavating the home and the area around the home. Really, Wayne State University is a Department of Anthropology, led by Dr. Krista Rzuski, who was the chairperson, my former professor, and also my colleague, and who's a well-renowned and well-known historical archaeologist. Actually led excavations at the home, which were also picked up by local news as well. There was excellent turnout. There was extensive participation by local residents and former Inkster residents who came and helped, excavate and sort of observe as well. We uncovered all kinds of artifacts, hundreds of artifacts, bottles, Faygo cans, some with the tab that you peel off the top, which are not common anymore. There were coins, and really, we were really fortunate. We found a coin from 1952, the year that Malcolm arrived. And so obviously we can't say with any certainty that that's Malcolm's coin, but, you know, given the fact that local residents, as has been relayed and conveyed by Mr. Robert Turley, that Malcolm and also the neighbors have reported that Malcolm used to sit on the porch and read books and magazines, and who knows, it's very possible that coin slipped right out of his pocket into the ground. So it was found right in front of the porch, just a few inches below the surface, several centimeters below the surface in the front of the porch. So that was a gem that was found on the last day and the last hour of excavations. And so we were super happy. We're still very excited about that. We found small toys. We even found a stroller from the late 1950s to early 1960s, which was found under the home and the crawl space of the house. And so it's pretty intact, obviously. It's missing some components, but overall it's in relatively good shape for being that old. And so that was found by one of the archaeology students and one of the archaeologists at Wayne State, who explored the crawl space and was able to pull out some items, this being by far, I think, the most fascinating one. And so we're thankful for that. We have the original address sign and some indication that the home's original paint was in fact this light cream color. And the site was also visited by the state archaeologist, senior archaeologist with the SHPO office, and was given an archaeological site number. So we've been able to do quite a bit over the past year or so, the past couple of years, apart from the fact that it took many years to get to where we are, thanks to a Project We Hope Dream Believe and Mr. Sims and Mr. Lynn and Ms. Janisha Washington and many others with Project We Hope Dream Believe. We also plan on continuing excavations in the near future. We were able to conduct some oral history while we were doing the archaeological excavations, and so one of the neighbors provided us with a photo of the Malcolm X, Wilfred Little, and Ruth Little home. This is standing at the north, looking south at the house towards its northern face from 1967. And so as Mr. Turley has noted, he's been spending years collecting oral history and information, as has Mr. Sims. And we were able to thankfully and really fortunately interview a couple of Malcolm's former neighbors who described him as you know, as a kind person, as someone who was very sociable. One neighbor described how he would walk across the street and enjoy breakfast and coffee with her parents in the early 1950s, and would even return later on in the early 1960s back to the home as well. So that's an aspect of the project we are looking to continue to expand. So our future plans are to rehab the home, create a museum there, conduct additional archaeological excavations, in the process of getting a historical marker. As Mr. Sims had noted before, the creation of a Malcolm X sort of community center, vocational training center for youth next door in the adjacent lots. And we are working on also, you know, creating a documentary on both the project we hope to remove believes efforts to preserve the house, but also to provide create a documentary that really covers Malcolm's time and life in the city of Inkster. So I'll conclude with this here. The entire project of Project We Hope to Believe is very thankful for the African American Civil Rights Grant through the Historic Preservation Fund and then NPS. Thank you to the current and former residents of the city of Inkster, the Project We Hope to Believe's board, and the broader community for your support. Thank you for SHPO, NPS, MHPN, Wayne State, so many others who have been assisting us in this process over the last year and a half or so, last couple of years. Here's some links if you want to learn more about the project as well. And I'll leave you with the last slide, which is Malcolm himself saying that he used to live out here in Inkster. And if I can get this to play, is it not playing?
I used to live out here in Inkster.
I'm not sure if you could hear that. Play it one more time.
I used to live out here in Inkster.
And that was from a speech from February 14th, 1965, just a week before he was assassinated in New York. And here he is essentially acknowledging that he lived out here in Inkster. And so we'll stop here and we can take questions. Mr. Sims and Mr. Turley and myself can hope to answer. So there's still about 12 or so minutes left.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Tark,
Thank you.
Aaron and Robert. It's great webinar, great information. And we have a lot of questions. I would just go ahead and then read one by one and feel free to answer and comment. First one is for Aaron. Is Aaron still here?
Yep, I'm sitting here.
Okay. When you first told the Inkster City Council that the home was within the city, was there anyone who knew it was there? Did they know right away how important it was?
I think for the most part, you had a few people who knew and a few people that didn't know. So I guess when you look at the structure of the city of Inkster, it's different sections to Inkster. So on the, I guess it would be like the north side of Inkster, which is across Michigan Avenue to Cherry Hill. I don't think too many people would have known, because if you really stay south of on the south side, which is Michigan Avenue to Annapolis, those people kind of like knew each other over in that area more so than going on the north side. There was a lot of people who did know and a lot of people who didn't know. So it kind of like went back and forth. He did and he didn't live in the city of Inkster. And just by us being able to pull up the FBI file, I think the FBI file really solidified that he did live there. Because one of the questions was, as we were growing up, and we lived on the south side, there was a center there, and Robert could probably elaborate more on the Malcolm X Center, because one of the questions me and Dewan asked each other was, well, why do they call it the Malcolm X Center? So it had to be some truth to Malcolm X actually living in the city of Inkster. And the FBI file really showed that he did live there. So if Robert would like to elaborate a little bit on the center and just and just have more history about the center and why it was called the Malcolm X Culture Center.
If you want me to answer that now, I'd be happy to answer that. And also, I saw there was a question about documenting oral history, so I can address that now as well. The first building in the world named after Malcolm X was the Malcolm X Cultural Center in Inkster. The first anything, the first structure, the first before there were any park. I mean, now around the world, there are parks and plazas and streets named after Malcolm X. But the very first building, place, thing, or anything named after Malcolm X was the Malcolm X Cultural Center in Inkster. It was formerly the Harrison Recreation Center, and residents forcibly took over the center and renamed it. That's a whole story in itself. And in regards to documenting the oral history, Project We Hope, Dream, and Believe is conducting video interviews of some of the people who are familiar with Malcolm and who knew Malcolm when he was at Inkster. And as has been mentioned here, I have a memoir coming out entitled Inktown, and I share much of that oral history in the book. And there's more, which I've documented as well. That's not in the book. A lot of it's covered on the tour, but there's even more that's not even covered on the tour yet. And there are a number of things for which I'm seeking further verification, just to be sure that we're being rigorous in our verification of the oral history. There was Dr. Ramadan mentioned Linese Muhammad. I don't know if you mentioned her by name, but she recently wrote a book on the her years in the Nation of Islam, and her parents were good friends of Malcolm. She knew Malcolm when she was a child, and her mother related stories of Malcolm selling Stanley products door to door in Inkster. So there are great stories like that. Matter of fact, I don't know if you're able to, Professor Ramadan, to go back to an earlier slide that showed the aerial view. Yeah, keep going. I'll tell you when to stop. It's a few more before that. Keep going. Yeah, keep going. I think a couple more before this. And right there. Yeah, you can actually see, if you look in the very upper left corner, that bit of vacant land right there, that was 4151 Henry Street, right around the corner from 4336 William Street. And that is where Malcolm conducted his very first services of his career as a minister. And Linese Muhammad lived in that home, and she recounts that experience and how Malcolm brought his first converts there. And started out with just a handful of people, maybe just 5 or 6. Actually, it was 5 or 6 people in the living room of that home. Fortunately, that home is gone. But many of the other structures we're talking about still exist in Inkster. Not only the home, but the cut rate department store, which is now a Dollar Tree. That building is still there. And not only did Malcolm work there, but the events that triggered this conversion of Malcolm to Islam, and also I think put the entire civil rights movement into fast forward, began in that building, because that's Wilfred says, and this is not written anywhere, we only know because of a speech that Wilfred gave, that Wilfred was manager of the store. It was there at that store that he met the Muslim man that converted Wilfred to Islam, and that event ended up bringing about the other events. Ended up bringing about Wilfred and others converting Malcolm to Islam, and then, as I said, I think put the changed the history of our country and put the civil rights movement to fast forward. And it all began at that building that's still there. There's another building where Malcolm used to do some of his first street corner preaching, grocery store in Inkster, and that building is still there. We visit that on the Malcolm X tour. And Eddie Miles, owner of the, pardon me, owner of the Black and White Cab Company, he used to let Malcolm drive a cab without charging the fee. He let Malcolm keep the profit, so he would have money for conducting his services in Inkster. And there are also tales of other places where he conducted services, and I'm trying to get the minutes from one particular institution where it is said that he conducted some of his first meetings. So there is a very rich oral history, which unfortunately is not covered in any of the history books. Malcolm's history in Inkster is entirely neglected by all his biographers and historians, even though it is a long, deep, rich, and very important history. And we all of us here today are looking to correct that.
And if I could just one last thing about the oral history, there was a man named Willie Williams who owned a real estate company in the city of Inkster. And I remember when we first got started with the project of the home, Willie Williams had came to us and expressed how he would love to see the house done, because when Malcolm became the minister over at Mosque Temple number 1, that's how he became Muslim, was following Malcolm. And he used to talk about how he used to ride the bus and drive with Malcolm from Inkster to Detroit to go to Mosque Temple number 1. But sadly, before we could get those, get that recorded by Mr. Williams, he had wound up passing away. So part of the effort of doing this house is for Mr. Williams, because he was our big push to make sure that we carried this legacy along.
And I do want to add lastly that that Malcolm did intend to construct a Nation of Islam temple in Inkster. So Inkster was not some sort of pass through. He wasn't simply, living in Inkster for, a short period in hopes to go elsewhere. He actually had plans for the city of Inkster, for the village of Inkster, and actually intended on creating a temple there for the Nation of Islam. It didn't happen. Malcolm was ultimately sent to the East Coast to recruit in places like Philadelphia and Boston, New York. But he did, in fact, intend on creating a temple in the city, in the village of Inkster in 1952 or 1953.
And I do believe, I think we're still trying to check into it, but we're trying to find out how much of the autobiography of Malcolm X was written in the city of Inkster, because what we do know is that the Haley family actually lived in Inkster. So, so at some point through the life of Malcolm, Alex Haley has family and family ties that still lives in the city of Inkster, and Robert could touch on that if time permits. But we're taking into consideration that some of the autobiography of Malcolm X have had to be written in the city of Inkster, because Alex Haley family is there as well.
I'll just take 10 seconds to say that, yeah, there's a rich oral history regarding the Haley family in Inkster. The Haley family married into the Holt family, which remains a large family in Inkster and has been there nearly 100 years. And he wrote and researched much of Roots in Inkster.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Do people and groups preserving the various sites associated with Malcolm X talk together or work together?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry, I can read it here. Let's see, please.
I think if whoever if they could just elaborate just a little more, because it says, do the people and groups preserving the various sites associated with the Malcolm X talk together and work together? So I'm not for sure if that's pertaining to a project We Hope, Dream, and Believe question, or if it's pertaining to different organizations working with project We Hope, Dream, and Believe. So I'm not really sure how to really answer that. So I guess if the person So if we could probably come back to that, if the person who wrote it would like to elaborate just a little more.
I think you're asking whether other organizations work in conjunction with your organization.
Okay, so I'll answer it that way. Well, we have opened up the platform for everyone to take part. So we do have like different organizations who did come out at the beginning of the start to help clean the house out. Organizations such as CUP, which is a community up project. One Mission Church came out. It was a lot of hands on deck. Robichaud High School brought kids over. When we started out and as we go, it has intrigued a lot of people to want to be a part of the movement. And we've opened the door for all groups to come in, and we've accepted everyone without turning no one away. And we just enjoy the outcome of everybody showing up and being a part of the group.
Let's see the next question. As the Malcolm X house is restored, what impact are you seeing on its immediate neighborhood?
I think for me, when I go by the house, it's the ones that live on the street or close by. They always roll down the street and be like, "Hey, how long before the house open up?" So I truly believe that everyone is excited. They're ready to see what's going to come about with the house. A lot of people pull up and be like, "Well, what y'all doing with the house?" When we tell them that it's going to be a museum, they be like, "Man, we can't wait till it opens. We would love to see the outcome and learn more about Malcolm." So I will say that the impact for the community is very strong, and Project We Hope and Believe really appreciate the support that the community has given us in moving that project forward.
But sadly, there have been people, and Eric can confirm this, that there have been people in the community, including within the city government, who have been opposed to this entire effort all along. And it's a sad part of the history as well. But unfortunately, I don't think that's unique to Inkster. Bureaucracy often doesn't work well in a lot of municipalities. But there were people who were opposed to doing this for various reasons. Some people didn't think that tourists would come to Inkster or would come to this neighborhood, and I'm sure that they're going to be proved very wrong. And I know that there was some Islamophobia involved as well. I hate to say, but there was some of that expressed, and we've moved on from that, fortunately, and continue to defy the naysayers who are diminishing.
Next question. Do you feel that the entire chronology of Malcolm X's life has been established, or are there still periods of time where we do not yet know where he was, where he lived, what he was doing?
Okay, I'll just jump in real quick on that one, if you don't mind. As Ryan said, his entire history in Inkster has been neglected, and there's still more research to be done, and I think more resources could go towards that.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true. I think that the few references to Malcolm's life in Inkster that do exist in a few autobiographies and a few biographies, like Manning Marable's and Les Payne's, which again only briefly mention Inkster and kind of mostly in passing. And we see that the major urban cities are the backdrop to most of Malcolm's life, but there's really such little emphasis and attention to Inkster, which is clearly pivotal. I mean, it's a moment in Malcolm's life in which he formally becomes Malcolm X. And it's his first sort of the foray into his life as a public servant, as an assistant minister of the Nation of Islam. And of course, it's the beginning of his ascent to becoming a global civil rights icon. And so it's really difficult in that Robert had actually, mentioned this a while ago in that chapter 12, the autobiography, which clearly discusses and describes Malcolm's life with his brother in Wilford. The setting is Detroit, which, I mean, people didn't know, I'm sure, where Inkster was or what Inkster was, in the early 1960s, when, Detroit was up in the time that Malcolm, for example, arrived in Inkster. It was a village of 17,000, while Detroit was a city of 1.7 or so million. And so it's quite difficult to kind of disentangle, where Malcolm was in his own autobiography specifically. Because it looks like all the moments where he's living in Inkster are actually described as being in Detroit. And I think much of the sort of the journalistic, I think, covering of Malcolm over the past several decades, I think does the same exact thing. And so we're left to kind of wonder, where were some of these events happening? Were they actually taking place in Detroit, as some of the records indicate, or were they actually happening in Inkster? So the FBI files have been really, really good at trying to provide at least some very specific kinds of context to Malcolm's particular kinds of whereabouts in 52 and 53, but also the excavations, the oral history that Robert and Aaron have been collecting as well, and we've been collecting with video interviews and recordings and photographs, and these new archaeological excavations. We're really, again, trying to reconstruct the social life of Malcolm X in the city of in the village and city of Inkster, because there are so many gaps in the historical record that simply don't reflect the reality of Malcolm's lived life in Inkster. And so that's what this project has really kind of also morphed into, is filling the historical gaps and providing a holistic assessment and depiction and portrayal of Malcolm in Inkster, which is undoubtedly one of the most significant times of his life. Reconnecting with his brother, joining the Nation of Islam, and then beginning his career, right? And so that really—
Yeah, sorry, but yeah, some of his first sermons, speeches, had been written in that house, that very house, because that's where he was when he first became a minister.
Absolutely, exactly.
Thank you. And next question. It was very interesting when the Malcolm X house was presented to the State Historic Preservation Review Board to consider for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. It challenged the National Register guidelines on physical integrity, which is a national discussion. Did you have any concerns that the home would be approved to move forward for National Register consideration? And congratulations on the listing.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Krieger. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. But yes.
For me, I would say yes. I was on pins and needles from the start of finding the house up until the time that we got the grant and was approved the grant. Because I knew the condition that the home was in, and I was, when we went before the historical preservation, I just had my eyes closed and was just hoping and praying that they would just say it's a go. And when they said it was a go, I was so relieved and honored to have it done. So. Yeah.
There were concerns because obviously the house doesn't have the aesthetic appeal that is associated with so many other historic sites, and so yeah, we were obviously like Aaron said, we were on pins and needles because I mean the house obviously has conditions, right? The outside, the inside, the exterior, the interior, and so there was certainly concern. But we're so grateful, so thankful. We had so much incredible support too, and so much interest, across the board from so many of the organizations, both locally and even nationally, that have been really encouraging in this process. So we're grateful, we're thankful, and we're still elated. We're still incredibly happy, and that's been motivating us, I think.
But as Dewan Lin said, we have the house. And in Omaha, they were his birth site. They don't even, there's no structure there. There is no home. And that's a site that's visited by people from all over the world. But here in Inkster, we have one of the couple of houses that he actually lived in. And I would argue maybe even the most important one.
Agreed. Agreed.
Okay. Okay. As a museum, the home will only be able to have a few people inside at a time. Do you anticipate having an interpretive center on adjacent property?
I think we're still in the sort of preliminary, I guess, period of trying to decide precisely how to go about with the museum. Because of limited space, we do foresee having limited numbers of people entering the museum at any given particular time, but we do hope to expand the sort of the parameters of the property a little bit so that it can accommodate more people. And we do hope to have also have created a pamphlet, maybe an interactive sort of component to the museum as well that can help familiarize people with the home itself, with Malcolm X, but also with Inkster more broadly speaking. And so we're hoping that we can utilize, you know, the future properties that are the properties that are adjacent to the home and across the street from the house, which the nonprofit also owns, in trying to help facilitate, you know, a positive and immersive museum experience for tourists. That's something we're still trying to work out. But we definitely hope to utilize our resources, both physical and financial, in helping to create an immersive environment that is welcoming, but also educational and manageable.
Okay, last one. Oh, yeah, okay. What involvement has the family had in the project? Like Malcolm's family, I assume.
Yep, Aaron can answer that question.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I was so we've been I've been in communication with the family. One thing that we do take into consideration is even though we are running a project and we know what it is that we would love to see at the house, we figure it would be no more than right to have a communication with the family of Malcolm X because it was their family member. So we make sure that whenever we come up with a brilliant idea, we just don't move forward with the idea. We will shoot the family an email and to ask them, you know, like, what do you guys think about us doing this or doing that? And when we first did that, the oldest daughter, Atala, which is Ambassador Shabazz, she actually sent the email back and she thanked us for involving them into what was going on with the house. So we didn't want to just get away from doing it our way, but we wanted to make sure that the family of Malcolm actually had some role and some play into what we were doing. And when we were able to make the presentation to the historical preservation, it was an honor to have Ambassador Shabazz, which is Malcolm's oldest daughter, Atala, to actually be on the Zoom call for the state of Michigan nomination. I think it just spoke volume about the involvement in what we were doing. To have her to be able to speak and congratulate the state of Michigan for nominating a home. But even while talking to the family, it was an honor just to hear her say that she remembers the house. She remembers coming to the house when they were little. When their dad would come to Detroit to be involved in a speech or to do any kind of work while here in Michigan. She said that he would drop them off at their Uncle Wilford house, and they would keep them while their dad goes and handle business. You know, and then come back and pick them up, whether they drove back to New York or whether they flew back to New York. They were always there as a family. I think one of the greatest parts was when they came back the week when Malcolm was assassinated, when the house was firebombed, and they came back to the house as he gave his last speech here in Detroit before they went back home. And come to find out, she actually visited the home while her Uncle Wilford still lived there. And she became her Uncle Wilford's caretaker all the way up until the time he passed away at the Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit. So she previously always visited the state of Michigan and the city of Inkster. I'm not for sure what was the timeline after Malcolm's death that Wilford moved out of the house. But just to hear the stories from the family, you know, about just coming to Inkster and being in Inkster, you know, it was very, very, very amused, like very nice to hear.
Yeah, Janet said, great presentation. Please come get back and give us updates on the work moving forward. Yeah, we would really love to hear another presentation from you with updates sometime in the future.
Soon, actually, Mr. Arthur Edge, who posted also. Mr. Arthur Edge is also on Project We Hope Dream Believe. He's the one who's going to be leading the renovation. So that's the next phase. Is we're just waiting to break ground and start the rebuild. But Mr. Arthur Edge is the one that's going to be doing that.
Yeah, so Mr. Arthur serves as our head contractor for the Malcolm X project. So from beginning to end, he's the man to see, from the very first nail to the front door close of the project. He's been a great part of having everyone lined up, ready to go for the construction part. The roofers, electrician, you name it, Mr. Arthur has everybody set in place, ready to go. So we do take our hat off to Mr. Arthur Edge for his hard work.
And thank you for the kind words, Mr. Edge.
Okay, thank you so much for your time today. And this is a great presentation. And thank you everybody for participating. This webinar is being recorded. You will receive the link to the recording probably sometime like tomorrow or Monday. And so feel free to share the recording with people that you think would like to hear it. And our next webinar is scheduled for September 28th. It's celebrating and preserving Hispanic and Latino heritage in Southwest Detroit. And I hope to see you all soon.
I will definitely be at that. That's the neighborhood I was born in.
Yeah, so check our website for when registration. It should be open very soon. Okay, thank you so much.
And I want to say thank you, MHPN. I don't know if I had a chance to say that, but I want to say thank you very much because I'm sure we all really appreciate this opportunity. I know I do.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Johan, Robert, Aaron, Elaine, MHPN, SHPO, WSU, everyone, NPS, everyone. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Have a great day. Bye.
Thanks, you too. Thank you.